Right, so I hope that she'll give me some grace.
Thank you, Jen. You actually got it right. Well, it's great to be able to actually present right after Deb's and Kevin's presentation because it gives you a good lay of the land of RRAP. And what I'm going to present today is on a specific project called Community Panels for novel reef interventions. But before I go and proceed, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that to the traditional owners who are in the room today. So my understanding is green button, is that right, Jen? Okay. So as we heard this morning, oh wow, the writing down there, so I'm going to have to look here. As we heard this morning, so the increasing pressure on the reef has really catalyzed a rethinking of the ways we manage the reef, and that also includes in the way we engage with people. And this is a question that in RRAP that we're investigating under the sub-program on traditional owner and stakeholder engagement, which is really dedicated in exploring how we open up spaces for deeper engagement with traditional owners, but also a whole range of different modes of engagement with communities, industry groups, and other stakeholders. And this is really aligned with kind of the notion from responsible innovation, which is about really that opening that space for dialogue and two-way decision-making. In this sub-program, there's a range of models of engagement and practices that are being explored with scientists from JCU, from CSRO, from UQ, and QUT. And I really encourage all of you to go and see some of these presentations that are going to be over the next few days. And we've really been trialing these different approaches and bringing in the science, but really thinking about what does that actually mean in practice and sharing the lessons learned from that experience and the 4 years of trialing different things. So today I'm going to be focusing on one of those, which is around community panels. So community panels are place-based panels which give an opportunity for community members to have that deep engagement with RRAP scientists over a long period of time. So there's a space where you can have sharing of knowledge, exchange of ideas, and get to really explore things a little bit more in deep. We had the first community panel completed in last year in 2022-23 in Townsville, and we've just initiated a second panel here in the Cairns-Port Douglas region, and I've seen some community panel members in the room earlier, so it's really great to see those members here. And what we were really interested in doing is having as much of a diversity of community members being able to have an option to participate in this. So we had an open expression of interest call, and then the panels themselves have really focused on a few key interventions because we really wanted that long-term dedicated engagement from the RRAP scientists themselves as well in this process. So the Townsville Community Panel focused on 2 coral reef interventions around coral aquaculture and deployment and enhanced corals and treatments, and also that's being led by AIMS, and there are a number of talks around that. And then the marine cloud brightening that's being led by Southern Cross University. Just going on in terms of the design of the panel itself. So we've structured it around essentially approximately 5 meetings to provide this long-term opportunity to engage together. And the design of those panels, the kind of overarching structure, is really informed by a transdisciplinary approach. So we've looked at different literatures from the social sciences and interdisciplinary literature, but also from the fields of facilitation, and brought that together to kind of construct that overall arching framework and the meetings. But also as we engage with community panel members and the scientists themselves, they bring in their own perspectives on how the panel should be constructed. So it's in terms of themes to be covered, but also in terms of the kind of the activities that we engage in within those meetings. So it's a really joint collaborative effort that adapts over time. And one of the key things for us when we started piloting these community panels was thinking ahead, how could we share the insights and the knowledge that we have gained in piloting this kind of approach, and share it more broadly and translate it into greater use. So that's been at the front of our minds from the very get-go. And one of the literatures that we've been drawing upon is from the notion of scaling up, out, and deep, which is scaling literature from the social innovations literature, but also transitions to sustainability. So when you think about scaling deep in the context of the community panels and RRAP, what we're thinking about is really how do you build a culture of deliberative engagement, a culture where you really promote dialogue, knowledge sharing, and then in terms of scaling up, it's about how do you bring the lessons learned from that kind of deliberative practice and sort of inform some of the more formal institutions. Now, in the literature, when you're thinking about scaling up, it's about changing laws and regulations, but that's not kind of what we're thinking. We're thinking about how do you, with those formal institutions, the REEF agencies and funders, and the RRAP program more broadly, how do you explore opportunities for them to play a role in supporting and opening spaces for greater dialogue and sharing of knowledge around REEF interventions? And then in terms of scaling out, it's really about how do you create more spaces where scientists and community members can come together and really have that more longer-term, meaningful kind of two-way discussion moving forward. So what I'll be sharing in the next slides is some of the strategies we used, particularly for scaling deep, because for us in the community panels, one of the key things that we were trying to understand better is how do you create the deliberative culture? And the deliberative culture is just one approach of engagement which sort of complements other engagement approaches between community and scientists which currently exist in the REEF space. So you've got a lot of instances where you have scientists informing the public, and then you've got spaces where community are consulted and provide an advisory role to scientists. But you don't have many spaces where you really have that two-way dialogue and sharing of knowledge and more deeper discussions. So for us was kind of trying, can we create that deliberative engagement? How would it work? What kind of strategies would work? And so we'll be sharing a few of the strategies that we used that we found have worked well. So in terms of the scaling deep strategies, we found that it was really important to focus on the activities and approaches that really provided an opportunity for community panel members and the scientists there to get to know each other on a personal level. So there were exercises such as sharing your reef story, and the importance of really connecting, which we've heard a lot about today, is really building kind of the space for trust and being able to create sort of the conditions where you're going to go into a genuine dialogue where you can be open and question things and really kind of co-produce your ideas moving forward. Of course, most of the panel meetings have really focused on how can we get that dialogue and sharing of knowledge happening. So we did that through a number of different ways that included sort of the traditional, kind of presentation of information by scientists, but complementing that with sort of Q&A opportunities for community members to ask questions and to have that two-way conversation. We also have incorporated a number of really group-level activities throughout the meetings, so really for scientists and the community panel members to dig in a bit more into the questions that were raised, into the uncertainties, to kind of share some of the concerns, some of the, to ask for clarity. And that's both ways, right? It's for the community members to understand the reef intervention science, but also the scientists to understand some of the concerns that community members have and some of the kind of opportunities and benefits they see in the deployment of interventions on the reef. And then lastly, what we found worked really well was just the opportunity given to continue those kind of dialogues, but in place where you can actually see the intervention itself. So there were visits to Ames, CSIM, and then to the boat to actually see the misting for the marine cloud brightening. In terms of scaling out strategies, we tried a couple of different things. One being we had planned already ahead was thinking about a second community panel, so drawing on the Townsville Community Panel, what have we learned, what would we adapt differently to pilot a second panel, and that's the Cairns Port Douglas that just has been kicked off. But the other way we were exploring was whether the community panel members themselves could play a role in sharing their experiences of having that long-term dialogue with scientists, and to share that experience and the benefits they got out of that with other community members. So there were opportunities for panel members to post things on their social media about the experience. One panel member presented at a local community event, the Pechacucha in Townsville. And then a couple of panel members had an opportunity to present with myself and Aaron at the Social Science Communities Reef, Community for the Reef Symposium that happened in Cairns. And in terms of scaling up strategy, one of the approaches that we really tried to unpack and explore was, could we, by deliberating, having scientists and community members come together and talk over an extended period of time through a series of structured activities around the benefits and risks associated with the interventions, could we have that process eventually help inform within RRAP the risk assessment process and group, and also kind of open up some of the considerations of benefits and risks that the scientists within the intervention programs themselves were thinking of. So moving forward, I mean, one of the key questions for us in the sub-program in general is, as we move from this so these R&D phase, which was it Deb and Kevin really laid out nicely. So as we're shifting from this R&D phase, which has been happening in terms of the reef interventions, but also within the sub-program for engagement, and we're thinking about the pilot deployments, how could further engagement be structured into a process where, as you're going into the planning for the pilot deployments, you can really embed further engagement into those decision-making and planning processes. And for us specifically from the community panel work, it's really thinking, what is the contribution of what we've learned from the community panels in terms of those more deliberative practices of engagement, those dialogues, those exchange of knowledge, the co-production of knowledge together. How could that potentially inform as we move forward into the pilot deployment phase? So some of the things that we've been kind of thinking about, and this is really early phase for us, is thinking about, so in terms of scaling out, it's not necessarily, producing a number of community panels up and down the coast. It's about the spreading and the sharing of kind of the principles of deliberative engagement, about dialogue and two-way exchange. How could those potentially be embedded in different spaces, both within the collaborative planning process, but also with our partners where we're engaging about the reef intervention space? In terms of scaling up, how can we be thinking about embedding sort of the practices in that collaborative planning process, but also like when I was talking earlier about how can we talk with our partners, so the agencies that are working in the reef and the funders, about what kind of role can they be playing in terms of raising awareness about the value of these kinds of deliberative methods, but ways to support and enable greater spaces for that to happen. And then within RRAP, it's about also how can we further expand the considerations about benefits, co-benefits, and also risks into the next points and decision points in the planning process for pilots. And then with scaling deep, I think one of the key things for us has been how can we harness what we've learned from building a deliberative culture? Because one of the things that we came out from the Townsville panel in particular was both community members and scientists really sharing back with us how much they valued that opportunity and what they got out of it for themselves personally, but also professionally. So there is one of the key lessons for us was that there is an interest and there for that kind of deliberation. So how can we keep fostering that in a way that complements other ways of engaging together, and to embed that more into RRAP and other spaces in the reef? So thank you.
Thank you, Sam. We're just about at time, but any quick questions? Hey.
G'day, thank you, Sam. I just had one question on the Slido from an anonymous person just inquiring whether local marine advisory groups were consulted in building the community panel for this.
Thanks for that great question. In our Cairns Port Douglas community panel, we have a member from the LMAX. So when we reached out and with those expressions of interest for the panel here, we made the LMAX aware of that expression of interest and really actively encourage them to apply so that we can, engage with that person, but also part of moving forward is thinking more broadly about how do we engage more sort of deeply around this space with the LMAX. So how could the LMAX learn from our experience in doing this deliberative kind of engagement in the community panel, but also what can we learn from the LMAX themselves, from the long history of engagement that they've had. So that's definitely part of moving forward. Mm-hmm.
Great question, and thank you, Sam.